You're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Since 2009, the Pharmacy Podcast has been leading podcast publications as the insider voice of the pharmacy industry. Explore the profession and business of pharmacy through audio. Join us at pharmacypodcast.com or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or any of your favorite podcast directories.
This is the PGX for Pharmacists podcast. We believe pharmacists are the best positioned providers to lead in PGX. Pharmacogenomics is the study of how genes affect a person's response to drugs. This relatively new field combines pharmacology and genomics to develop effective, safe medications and doses that will be tailored to a person's genetic makeup. This podcast is dedicated to pharmacists with an interest in learning more about the data analytics, industry trends, and evidence-based usage of pharmacogenomics. Welcome to PGX for Pharmacists, part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
According to the American Academy of Family Physicians, there are more than 50 cytochrome P450 enzymes or CYP enzymes but there are just 6 of them that metabolize about 90% of the drugs. One of the most significant one is the CYP2D6. In an article on Helio written by one of my favorite pharmacists, Dr. Jay Patel, who actually had the pleasure of having on my show a few episodes ago. It's a must-read article, by the way. I will provide the link in the show notes. He talks about CYP2D6 metabolizing many of the SSRIs, SNRIs, TCA that are the treatment options for depression. The clearance of TCAs, for example, is about 50 to 67% lowered in CYP2D6 poor metabolizers compared to normal. So that's huge when we talk about adverse effects. Hi, everyone. My name is Banas Sarami, the host to PGX for Pharmacists podcast on the most amazing, largest pharmacy podcast in the nation, in one of the top 20 podcasts in genomics globally. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm a medical science liaison for a PGX company called ID Genetics, where I develop clinical contents, educating clinicians on the value of PGX and give clinical guidance. I also provide personalized mentorship sessions for pharmacists that want to create their own PGX path. I'm very excited about my guest today, Kristine Ashcraft. She's a molecular biologist by training and is a former CEO and founder of UScript, which actually was acquired recently by Invitae. She has worked in pharmacogenomics space since 2000 and was recently named one of the 25 leading voices in precision medicine. Kristine has authored multiple publications on both the clinical and economic benefits of PGX testing. She serves on the steering committee of STRIPE, which is the FDA collaborative committee for PGX. She has been interviewed by numerous media, including New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NBC Nightly News, and has spoken on American Society of Human Genetics and numerous precision medicine conferences. And now she's speaking on one of the top 20 genomics podcasts in the globe, PGX for Pharmacists podcast. Thank you, Kristine, for taking time to be on the show. I know we also have Tom Carlson, but I'll let you further introduce yourself, Kristine, and introduce Tom.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. As you had mentioned, I've been in pharmacogenomics since 2000, and I think I have been having conversations with Tom almost since the beginning. He is both a patient and a fierce advocate for pharmacogenomics because it's impacted both his care and the care of his family members so substantially that I can sense his frustration through email chains and other modes of communication over the years. But I thought it would be important to have that patient voice on this podcast, and really thank you for inviting both of us. But Tom, with that, if you could just share a little bit about your exposure to pharmacogenomics and how it's impacted your family and yourself.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. This is something I'm very passionate about because it has made a huge impact in my life and many of my family and friends. I was struggling with intermittent depression in 2005. I went to the Mayo Clinic and they did some CYP450 tests, which I'd never heard of before. And the results came back that I was poor metabolizer of the CYP2D6, specifically star.4, meaning I had no metabolizing power. And it turned out the medication I was on was actually making me worse. And so they put me on a different medication that was metabolized by a different enzyme. I've had no depression since. The Mayo Clinic was, since I'm in Minnesota, Mayo Clinic wanted my family to participate in a study to see how the enzymes were passed on to our family. And so they tested some more of us. And as you would expect, my parents both had problems, as most people do. In my mom's case, she was an intermediate metabolizer of the enzyme that metabolizes warfarin. And as her health changed, she went in to get on her first batch of warfarin. And I told her, now make sure your physicians and nurses know your intermediate metabolizer, which she may or may not have, but bottom line is they gave her the warfarin. As you probably know, they test for warfarin days later. Well, it turns out when she went back, she was given 5 times too much. And so obviously her metabolizing problem impacted that. And they told her literally, go home and don't move. You could bleed to death. And actually, we had a neighbor of ours had to have a fall and bleed to death. That was on warfarin. So it's a very serious thing. My dad it was a poor metabolizer of he had the exact same problem I did. Incidentally, his parents were from Sweden. I did some research on the internet, and something like 28% of Scandinavians have a problem with the CYP2D6. My dad had a routine hernia surgery. It was the same thing. I told him, make sure your physicians know you're a poor metabolizer. They didn't know anything about it. They put him on, I believe, oxycodone. My mom called. She says, get over here quick. There's something wrong with your dad. He had a host of different problems. I said, what did they put him on? I went on the internet. It was oxycodone. I called Genelex. The CEO came to the phone. I literally thought my dad was going to die right in front of me. And we just sweated this out, waiting for him to get better, which he eventually did. Just in those 3 incidents, I realized what a huge deal this was. And that was in 2008. So I've been extremely frustrated and frankly angry that this has taken so long to catch on in the medical community. And I just can't understand it, especially when I know physicians are required to get continuing medical education every year. I've talked to at least 40 physicians and pharmacists over the last, several years. I counted it up one day, and only one of them had ever heard of it. Anyway, to take it a step further, some other cases where knowing my 2D6 problem has helped is I was having irregular heartbeat, and I was the cardiologist was going to put me on a beta blocker. So I went on the internet, and I was like, hey, this beta blocker is not a good one for me. The physician wouldn't even talk to me about it. So I changed doctors, and it turned out I was on the wrong allergy meds for my enzyme problem, which was probably giving me an irregular heartbeat, which changed. So I also have I've found out I was on the wrong allergy medication. And once I switched, that problem went away. I've had 2 hips replaced, and the 2D6 is huge for opioids. And so knowing that helped me to get the correct pain relief after I had the surgeries. For the anesthesia, the fact that I knew my enzyme situation helped the anesthesiologist prescribe the right medication or the right anesthesia. And as a FYI, I've had 2 friends pretty much flatlined during surgeries from being on the wrong anesthesia. Again, they probably had enzyme problems. The other problem I had is like most older men, I have an enlarged prostate, and I was able to go on the internet and help my urologist get on the right medication. And I was the first patient he'd ever had that knew anything about this. I think it's important too, I talk about some friends that have had problems. I've had 2 friends that have had hips and knees replaced where they got no pain relief because they were on the wrong medications. And it not only was terrible pain, but they had to be hospitalized longer, which cost them thousands of dollars. I've had one friend that's sadly literally paralyzed from bad prescribing. He's in wheelchair bound. I've had 2 friends that were sick most of their lives, and I encouraged them for years to please get tested. They finally got tested, and it turns out that they couldn't metabolize folate, vitamin B, which is an essential nutrient. And so basically they couldn't methylate. And learning this helped them greatly improve their health. I think one of them uses a skin patch now. And they're very, very thankful that they got tested and got on top of this. Sadly, one of them was a pharmaceutical rep, and she'd never heard of enzyme testing. I could give you a lot of other examples too, but I think you got the message.
Yes. So
and I'll hold back.
Oh, no, we don't want you to hold back, Tom. I appreciate you sharing all that you know a ton of information. So I know you said when you were with telling the doctors about how to maybe change your therapy once, were the doctors receptive to what you were saying? Did they really believe you? Or I wonder what their impression or feedback was when you told them that.
Well, that's a real good question. And I'm very respectful of doctors with their passion for their profession, how hard they worked, how smart they are. I never try to make a physician feel bad or guilty that they don't know this information. But the way I explain it to them, as I say, you've known for years that people react differently to medications, right? Yes. And then I said, well, this isn't your fault, but it's been known for years that people have a different genetic makeup. There's some simple tests you can take, and you can find out exactly what medications will work best for your patients. And I would say all of them except for one have been very thankful. I told them that they didn't know. And I've also had these conversations with hospital pharmacists where they literally start sending another pharmacist in to hear my spiel. And I've had the same conversation with a pain specialist at a local hospital. When I had my first hip replacement done, they sent me in to talk to him, and he said, well, you know, I'm just new to this. I think you know more about this than I do. So anyway, what I tell the physicians is, this is proven science. It's evidence-based medicine. I give them the name of the URL for Genelex's website, and I tell them about the UScript software. And in several cases, I've referred many of my friends and family to Genelex for for testing. And they've all been, except for one case, all been very open-minded and thankful. I told them this, and I would say from the physician standpoint, they were kind of disappointed that a layperson like me had to be the one to tell them that this was available.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're putting the word out there as you see the clinicians. I think from what I hear with the clinicians, and I think Kristine, maybe you can jump in and answer too, of what you hear. It's kind of a different language they have to learn. I know there's probably classes or CEs or whatever they can take, but also understanding that language when they actually get the report, kind of implement that in the whole clinical recommendations they're making is kind of a little difficult. And then maybe using the right, or company or organization to have that system embedded in their EHR or EMR where it actually pops up as an alert. So all of that, I think it's, again, having the time to spend with the patient to go over it after they understand it. So all that piece, I think, is a lot of pieces that need to be put together for a clinician, maybe be more comfortable with the results and what do they do with that information. I think that's the key. But, a lot of them, and including pharmacists, may not already know about PGX. So it's a lot of clinical education that needs to be made.
If I can just jump in for 1 second.
No, go ahead, please.
I used to be able to access the UScript software, and they have made it so simple for people to use. I just don't think it takes that much training. I mean, all you got to do is get tested. You put your enzyme situation in, you put what medications you're on. It'll show you a color-coded chart if you're in any dangerous areas. If it turns out you are, it takes you to another place where you can get alternative medications for the same medical condition that would work better with your enzymes. You can plug those in, and you can update your search engine, if you will, and it'll show you how your body will react. And it's even got, you can click a button and it'll take you out to the latest research on PubMed. So my frustration as a patient is this stuff isn't that hard to learn. Why is it taking so long? I first read about this on the cover of Business Week in 2005. That's 17 years now that, that's a long time for to not have people up to speed on the latest technologies.
Yeah, and I think I can speak to a little bit about what I've learned over the course of over 20 years in this space. So I'm a molecular biologist by training, so I'm more come at things from the genetics angle. And I really wasn't that familiar with pharmacists and their training until I got into the space. And when I learned about how much time they spend in school learning about drug interactions and pharmacokinetics. So for me, it just is a natural extension of the training for pharmacists. Like pharmacokinetics and pharmacogenetics is essentially the same thing. If you're a poor metabolizer, it's like you're taking a potent inhibitor that never goes away of that same enzyme. This is how the FDA trains pharma to create new medications. They're like, give them these probe drugs that are potent inhibitors to make them as if they're a poor metabolizer. Like that has existed for decades. So it's a very natural extension, and they have far, far more training in how medications work in the body than a physician does. Physicians are very good at diagnosing diseases. And I think they then go, okay, if I've diagnosed this disease, this is drug A I give. And if that doesn't work, I give drug B. And if that doesn't work, I give drug C. So we're going at it. I think part of the reason that it's hard is that is the way we have practiced medicine for a long time. We haven't practiced precision or personalized medicine. We've practiced like medicine, like here's what we do for everybody, step A, here's what we do for everybody, step B. And so this is counter to a lot of how people have been trained. I am pretty excited that pharmacists more and more are getting included as part of the care team, especially in hospitals. I know Banaz mentioned Jay Patel. I know the pharmacists are very involved in a lot of oncology care programs, a lot of hospital care programs. And in my mind, I think that, if my loved one had a heart attack, I would want them to see a cardiologist. My loved one has a lot of medications. I want a pharmacist on that care team managing that, because they're seeing multiple different doctors that are prescribing multiple different medications. And especially when there's a lot of different drugs on board, this genetic information becomes more and more important. So it's been a very, very long time trying to get the education out there. I am pretty excited right now. Swalwell and Emmer in Congress are introducing legislation in January, the Right Drug Dose Now Act, that among other things would allocate funding to improve education for healthcare providers and patients around this. Because I think again and again, when people in this field are like, why isn't this standard of care yet? One of the big gaps is we just have not invested in the necessary education to get it out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I forgot to ask, how did you two connect? Because I know you're not in the space of, Kristine, a pharmacist or in the clinical space, like actually working with patients. So how did you guys end up connecting with each other, if I may ask?
Sure. So I don't provide clinical information, but I have had the opportunity over the years. Anytime a patient reaches out with a lot of either a great story to tell or a lot of frustration, they typically get kicked up to someone in management. And so anytime we had a story or a question about something, I had the opportunity to connect with a lot of people. And frankly, I keep both Tom Carlson and other patient stories in my inbox and go back to them anytime I get frustrated to remind myself why I keep pushing so hard after over 20 years to make this standard of care.
I know we appreciate that. And then again, we appreciate Tom actually opening, being open and sharing a story. But why? So you think, educating and having those that you mentioned, the Right Drug Dose Now Act, allocating funds for the education, do you think that's going to solve the problem, Kristine?
Well, it will partially solve the problem. That also allocates funding towards, in addition to the educational campaign, to your point, updating the electronic health records to incorporate drug-gene interactions. I would say that we would also want that extended to pharmacy software. But right now, in order to get credit for being an electronic health record, you have to check for drug-drug interactions. So the FDA and drug development guidance for decades has stated that drug-gene and drug-drug interactions are equivalent. Again, they have these prodrugs to make people as if they are poor metabolizers. And yet we do not incorporate standard drug-gene interaction checking within the EHR. And we have been putting discrete pharmacogenetic results in EHR for a very, very long time, just like other lab results. And this information can be utilized to make sure we can avoid the situations that Tom shared with us, like flagging if you're about to prescribe a medication that is not optimum based on other drugs the patient is taking or their genetics, and making that information easy and accessible within the workflow of the providers is another thing that is part of this legislation that I think will really help. So not making them think too hard about how to make the right decision for the patient.
Yeah, that's well said, not making them think too hard. But I get it, because they don't have a lot of time that they can spend with a patient. So I get that. Well, Tom, do you have... how are you trying to educate your clinicians or patients? Because I know you don't see doctors every day. Hope not. But how are you, educating on your end as a patient? Because it's one thing when we talk about PGX and what it does and how it's valuable for patient, but it's another to have you as the receiving end kind of going through the challenges and struggles and things like that, or with your family members. Having the word out there. So how are you educating clinicians or the people around you right now?
Well, my friends would tell you I've bombarded them with emails over the last 15 years that they should get tested, and trying to educate them on various aspects of this. And when I go to my local pharmacist, I have a extended conversation with them. And same when I go to hospitals or to my providers. So unfortunately, I don't have a bigger megaphone, but hopefully my advocating here will help.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, we can be your megaphone, but if you have other people around you that have a really good story to share, this is a good platform for everyone to hear, because our audience is mostly pharmacists and pharmacy students, and we have others as well, but this is a great platform. I know before the show kind of starting up, we were talking about something that was frustrating to you. I know you mentioned a lot when you spoke, but if you want to talk about your frustration and give a specific example of what was going on, we would love to hear it.
Yeah, well, I get the best analogy that I can come up with is to how important this is it's a gross exaggeration, but your body is almost like a car. Would you pour oil in your gas tank? Of course not. It would gum up and ruin your car. It might total it. And it's the same thing with prescribing medications. It seems to me you have to know what the person's genetics are before you can prescribe them medications. And the other thing I've told friends is it's the best money you'll ever spend, because the test results last a lifetime. If you're a parent, your kids might have the same problem. You can tell your relatives. And it not only reduces pain and suffering and speeds up healing, but it lowers your own cost of healthcare. If your doctor can get it right the first time, you don't have to have multiple visits to the doctor's office. You're not spending extra days in the hospital. You don't have wasted drugs in your bathroom, what have you. It's just so much more efficient to get tested and then use script software and do it right the first time. And the other thing I'm going to say is, and I'm not a pharmacist, but I've read stories of young people, getting on antidepressants and committing suicide. And there again, I based on my experience, if you're on the wrong one, it can make you worse. And so That's true. Just really important to get things right the first time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It came out a few years ago, but I was doing some research for a presentation on pharmacogenetics in psychiatry. And there was a publication that came out of Northern Europe in which they looked at patients that had committed suicide that were put on citalopram or escitalopram, which is metabolized by CYP2C19. And patients that were poor or ultra rapid metabolizers were much more likely to commit suicide. I think almost 10% increase, like direct increase, so greater than a 30% relative risk increase for suicide. And so when you talk about the repercussions of not incorporating this information, this is a real and avoidable adverse drug event. I think you hear all the time, first do no harm. To Tom's point earlier, almost 70% of doctors' visits result in a prescription. And I think a lot of doctors are like, oh, well, if there's a problem, the pharmacist will check it, and make sure that it's okay when they go to fill it at the pharmacy. That is a default I have heard from a lot of different physicians. But this is information we should be getting proactively so we can avoid weeks and weeks and weeks of somebody being on a medication that is not working for them at all, or being exposed to such high levels, it's causing more adverse effects than improvements. And I think it's a very real issue in psychiatry, in pain, in cardiology, as Tom spoke to. I am excited, over the course of years, Medicare local coverage determinations that came out last year did dramatically expand coverage for pharmacogenetic testing. So a lot of patients that are on Medicare can now have access to this without having to pay out of pocket. It's certainly worth the investment, but I do think a lot about, diversity, equity, inclusion. And I am concerned that, some people with less funding may not have the ability to pay out of pocket for something that could really dramatically improve their health. And so I think it's also necessary that we make sure that insurance gets on board with covering this for patients as well.
Kristine has posted studies in her blog which verify this, but in my opinion, the return on investment is just huge by getting tested. And, we have this huge national healthcare expense that's bankrupting the country. I just know, and the studies back it up, that our cost of healthcare would drastically reduce if people could get tested. And the thing is, it's like insurance. You've got to buy it before you need it, because it might take a week or two to get the test results back.
I know there's a study that came out, and they looked at the cost of non-optimized medications. And in 2016, the US spent $528 billion on non-optimized medications. To put that in perspective, that is more than we spend on any chronic disease. It's more than we spent on the medications themselves. And although genetic variability is not the only factor contributing to that, to Tom's point, even if we reduce that by only 10%, that's $52 billion a year. That would more than cover the cost of testing for patients that would benefit from it.
Yeah, definitely. You guys, I agree with all that. And Kristine, you were talking about, the physicians have it as kind of say, they're going to cash the error at the pharmacy. We should. The system either flags or the pharmacist either catches it. But to kind of say it another way, not everybody gets their medication from the same pharmacy. Some people get it from multiple pharmacies. Some people get a few from local pharmacy, and then also delivery systems. So the systems, obviously, if they're different, they'll communicate. So we might not be able to, a pharmacist may not be able to catch that for that one reason. I mean, there's multiple reasons, but that's one of them that, we don't talk about. Not everybody gets their whole entire medication from one location. And so that's also key. But I didn't know all these, I knew all these facts, but it's kind of, you put it in a nice perspective, both of you guys, and, how you think about it. It's great. I appreciate that. I think for our audience, we need to know what that looks like in, dollar amounts, and what does that mean? So if there's one thing, I love to have you guys, come back and we can continue conversation, and maybe, Tom, if you know anyone else that would want to talk to us. But if there's one thing that you guys both want our audience, which is really pharmacists and also pharmacy students, they're still in school, want to know, kind of what would that be?
Well, from my perspective, it would be everybody should get tested. Because like I say, the cost savings are enormous, and it's not including all the pain and suffering you can prevent. And I know when we were at Mayo Clinic in 2005, they said their goal was to have every 3-month-old tested within 3 years. And I know that hasn't happened for all kinds of reasons, but I just think it's that important.
I would add for pharmacists, I have come to believe that pharmacists are the natural experts in incorporating pharmacogenetics into care. A lot of the patients that benefit are taking multiple medications that are prescribed by multiple prescribers. As you mentioned, Manaz, they're going to multiple pharmacies, getting stuff by mail. I think polypharmacy, especially taking multiple medications, I think of it like a disease state. And if there is a specialist for the disease state that is polypharmacy, it is a pharmacist. And that includes understanding how these genetic factors dramatically impact response to medications and need to be utilized to optimize drug and dose selection for patients. So I would encourage any pharmacist or pharmacy student to make sure they are educated in pharmacogenomics, the impact it can have. Get additional certification if it wasn't well covered in your education. There are a lot of CPEs out there and programs because this is going to become more and more important in clinical care. There are pushes federally to start pushing this through the system. And this is really your chance to use all of that education you have to really dramatically improve patient outcomes in clinical care.
Well, I appreciate you both for coming on, and I know probably we'll have people have many questions for you both. Is it okay if they reach out to you, or what's the best place they can reach out to you both? I know Kristine, you're on LinkedIn, so they can reach out that way. But Tom, if people have questions, or they're people listening and like, oh my God, my mom or my cousin went through that, want to talk to Tom for support. Where can they reach you, Tom, if that's okay?
Well, I want to help people all I can. Unfortunately, I'm just kind of swamped with being an entrepreneur and things too. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that. I've thought about starting my own blog. I don't know how much I can add to what I've already said. It's just important to get tested.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like the blog idea.
Yeah.
I really do.
Well, yeah. I can chime in. I know that as a member of the STRIPE steering committee, we will be reaching out to the patient and healthcare provider and pharmacy community. March 24th, I believe, is National Adverse Drug Events Awareness Day. And we are going to be putting out some information so that patients and providers can share stories about either an adverse drug event that impacted them that could have been avoided, or a change that was made that, hopefully improved their outcomes. So we are going to be asking patients and providers to really share those stories to elevate the message of how this can truly impact patients.
That'll be awesome. Looking forward to it. Tom?
I've got to add one more thing.
Please.
I do not understand why this is not mandatory knowledge for a physician to know. Why isn't it mandatory in continuing medical education? I mean, when 70% of what they do is prescribe drugs. It just blows my mind.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. Hopefully we'll get there, but I know it's a very slow process and it's not right, but we'll get there. Hopefully with Kristine doing what she does best and you advocating and still educating, and myself and the podcast and everyone else, the message will come across where hopefully at the end of schools, whether it's MD, nurses, pharmacists, whoever has prescribing rights, they have to have that piece embedded in their curriculum, and part of their CE is a mandatory. I completely agree, Tom.
I would say, though, to Tom's point earlier about the car analogy, though, when I think about it again, physicians
that was brilliant, Tom,
to diagnose diseases, and pharmacists are really well trained in medication management. And I would say that although I do believe everybody should have additional education, I also think that we should incorporate pharmacists more into clinical care pathways into the team, because they have far, far more training in medications than physicians will ever have the time for. And I really think that in my perfect world, a doctor would diagnose a disease and a pharmacist would determine the right drug or dose to treat it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yes, I would have to agree with that for sure. Well, thank you so much, Kristine and Tom, for coming on the show. I hope to have you guys both back, of course. It's so different. We were so different when we just have the idea of PGX. We talk about it and how it helps versus have actually patient go through the experience on the other side and seeing the outcome. So I appreciate you, Tom, for being open to sharing your story. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and make sure you do not miss any episodes. Don't forget to share this link with everyone so they can tune in and listen to PGX for Pharmacists podcast on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. There's no other place to go for all your PGX needs. We do a lot of PGXing on here. So leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We love to hear from you. You can visit us on pgx4rx.com to listen to all our episodes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for your interest in PGX and for spending some time with us. Please share this podcast and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. For all of our episodes, please visit pgx4rx.com. That's pgx4rx.com.